Hello, my name is Jose, and I'm a librarian with the LA County Library. Thank you for joining us today for this very special event, Tracing the Path of the Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane with Ms. Linda Louie. As a reminder, the mics and videos will be disabled for the duration of this event. But that does not mean that this event cannot be interactive. If you have any questions or comments for the presenter, please sure to place them in the chat, address them to all panelists, and we'll address them as time permits. If you have any issues with audio and video, please let me know in the chat, and I'll be sure to address them. And don't forget that you can always join us via phone by calling 415-655-0001 and using the access code 177-180-4317. I'll be sure to place all that information in the chat just in case you didn't have time to jot it down. And finally, don't miss any of our other great upcoming virtual programs by visiting lacountylibrary.org/virtual program. And now I would love to introduce Ms. Linda Louie. She has been doing programs with the library for a very long time. And if you were fortunate enough to catch our first event, when we did a couple months ago, we had such a strong reaction. We just knew we had to have Ms. Linda back. If you missed that event, it is on our YouTube page, so be sure to check out that at youtube.com/LA County Library. And all of our past presentations that we've been able to record are up there for your viewing. This one will also be recorded and sent to everybody who registered for the event. So if you missed any part or you just want to see it again, I'll be sure to send out that link early next week. So you're in for a very special treat today. I'm very excited. I don't know if you can tell by the smile on my face that I'm very excited for this event. So I'll pass it over now to Ms. Linda. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, great. My name is Linda Louie, and I'm a tea enthusiast, a tea educator, and the owner of Bana Tea Company, which specializes in pu-erh tea. So today's presentation will be focused on pu-erh tea, including a trip that I took with famous author Lisa See, who published a best-selling book entitled The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane. Some of you may have already read the book, and if you did, I would invite you to travel vicariously with me today. And if you're not, I would highly recommend that you check out this book if you have time after today's presentation from your library. Next slide. Okay, all right. So in 2013, a friend brought Lisa See to my house. Although I have been a fan of Lisa and have read most of her books, but this was the first meeting that I met her in person. And I was told by my friend that the purpose of the meeting was for Lisa to taste some aged pu-erh tea and also to learn something about it. And during the meeting, Lisa told me that she was in the process of writing a novel using pu-erh tea and also the tea farming ethnic minorities in Yunnan as the backdrop of her story. And as you can tell, I was very excited. So after tasting the tea and also before she left, Lisa asked me which travel agent I used to when I went to Yunnan. Now, ecotourism to the tea mountains at that time was not available. So I invited Lisa to travel with me the next spring during my tea sourcing trip. Next. So in case if you don't know or you have never traveled to Yunnan, so where is Yunnan? So this is a map of China, and Yunnan is located in the far southwestern corner of China. So to the north, Yunnan touches the border of Tibet. And then to the south, Yunnan shares the border with Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. So this area is very mountainous, is subtropical, and is considered by scientists as one of the biodiversity hotspots in the world. Everything grows there. So no wonder that tea has been growing there for thousands of years. And Yunnan is not only very diverse in terms of plant biology, it is also very diverse in terms of people. And China has about 56 ethnic minorities, and almost half of them live in Yunnan. And tea farming ethnic minorities, they mostly live in the far southern part of Yunnan. And this is the area where I travel with Lisa, and the area that Lisa was going to start her story. Next. So Lisa and I met in Hong Kong, and then we flew to Guangzhou. Now, Guangzhou is formerly known as Canton. It's a very important trading ports, back in the days. So because this was my tea sourcing trip, so we first visited the Fangchuan, which can be translated as Fragrant Market, wholesale tea market. And the slide only shows one building. This is the inside and outside of the tea market. And actually, the tea market is way larger than that. It extends miles to miles, lined with tea shops, teaware shops. So you can actually spend at least a couple of days if you're really a tea enthusiast, and you can find any tea or any tea-related paraphernalia in there, teapots, whatever. Next. So in Fangchuan, if you have read the book, you also would notice that that was the place where the key character, Li Yan, had her tea shop. So this is a photo of Lisa strolling along the tree-lined pedestrian part in Xiamen Island. And Xiamen Island, Xiamen means sand surface, literally. And even though it's called Xiamen Island, it is actually not an island. It is more of a sandbank connected to the mainland by two small bridges. Now, back in the days, this area was an important port for Guangzhou's foreign trade, and it was occupied by France and also United Kingdom in the 19th century. So the architectures and the tree-lined pedestrian really reminds us of the colonial European period. So in the book, this is where Li Yan met her future husband. Next. So the next day, we flew from Guangzhou to Xishuangbanna, which is the oldest tea-producing region in Yunnan. There, we drove up to an area called Mengseng, and we met up with my tea master, and we had lunch before we hike up to the tea mountain, the tea garden. And the one on the man sitting to the right of Lisa is my tea master, my teacher, my mentor, my friend, Master Vespa Chan, who is a renowned pu-erh tea expert. Next. Now, Yunnan has two types of tea gardens. The photo at the bottom is a modern terraced tea garden where tea bushes are planted from cuttings and then kept small. This is the most common type of tea garden in the world. And the majority of the pu-erh teas are made from this type of tea garden. However, the photo on the top is what is something that we called the Old Grove Tea Garden, or some people call it the Ancient Tea Garden. Now, and I will talk about the Old Grove Tea Garden a little bit later, and that's the area where Lisa's story began. Next. Now, Yunnan is the area where tea was first cultivated. So in these ancient tea gardens, tea plants were planted from seeds and allowed to grow naturally as tall as maybe 20 feet. In Lisa's novel, she talks about mother tree, and I think the key character, the main character, gave birth to her daughter under the mother tree. Now, some people asked me, what is a mother tree? So basically, because all these trees were planted from seeds and have their own unique DNA, just like people. So actually, every tree can be a mother tree. And if you look at the photo on the left, if you look carefully, there is actually a man there, and he's a tea picker trying to pick the leaves from the top of the tree. Next. Now, during our trip and for Lisa's story, it was important for her to understand the processing of this particular tea, pu-erh tea. So the first step of the processing is called withering. Now, withering means kind of like just kind of let it go soft. You know, like if you have some vegetables that you buy from the market, you didn't want to put in the refrigerator, you leave it out for a few hours, it'll start to wilt. And the first step of tea processing is because there are a lot of moistures in the leaves, so that after picking, you need to kind of let it sit for a couple of hours, and then kind of let it get soft and to lose a certain amount of moisture. Next. So the second step is wok frying the leaves. And this process is called killing green or killing the green. And heat is added to the leaves to stop the oxidation of the leaves, or stop it from turning brown. So as you can tell, this is quite a labor-intensive process, and requires some arm muscles to fry the leaves. Next. Kneading and rolling. And we actually tried doing this process, but this process is rather difficult and requires a lot of experience. If you do not knead the leaves evenly, or if the pressure is not even, it can actually affect the flavors of the tea. So the purpose of this kneading is to break the cell structure of the leaves and also to squeeze the juice out. So by rolling, you have to roll it very evenly, and that is also to shape the style of the leaf. Next.
We did have a quick question that came in asking if you could clarify if you're saying pour tea, P-O-U-R?
Yes, P-O''U-R. The pronunciation is called pu-erh.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So next slide. So the following step is called sun drying. Now, most of the other teas are dried in the oven or a drying machine, except pu-erh tea has to be sun dried. And this is a very important criteria for pu-erh tea. So the picture on the left is, a farmer who just kind of laid it out under the sun. And then the one on the left is actually some of the farmers now built this kind of well-ventilated sunroom or greenhouse type of structure to dry the leaves. And the reason for that is that they don't want the dust, and also when it rains, when it gets really, or very cloudy, they don't have to worry that the leaves will get wet. So I asked the tea farmers, like, why does it need to be sun-dried? And this is one of the very few teas that require the sun drying. So the local farmers, offered two reasons. So number one is the farmers told me that, the sun drying can help absorb the ambient aroma. And Yunnan, as I said, it's a biodiversity hotspot. It has a lot of wildflowers, camphor trees, bamboo, orchids, you name it. So all the aroma from these plants, the tea farmers, believe that, by leaving the tea leaves under the sun, it would absorb those other aroma, enhancing the aroma of the tea. Now, the second reason is that sun drying does not completely dry the leaves. So for any tea, the final drying is very important because like once you process and get to your ideal taste and aroma, then you want to fix it. And the drying is to fix the flavor that you want in the tea. Now, sun drying does not completely fix that. And the reason is that I think the remaining moisture in the leaves can be very helpful in the future fermentation of the leaves. And I will talk about the aging aspect of this tea. Next. Sorting. So in pu-erh or in many teas, there's a standard in picking. When you pick, the tea picker would pick 2 leaves and a bud, and that's the standard. But sometimes tea pickers, especially the ones that have to climb up the trees, are not particularly precise in terms of picking 2 leaves and a bud. So sometimes it may include the 3rd leaves or the 4th leaf, and those are considered mature leaves, and they do not process very well. So after the tea is finished, then manually you have people to kind of sort out those older leaves that do not really taste as good as the two buds, the tender leaves. So then by removing those leaves that are undesirable, then it would just maintain the quality of the leaves or the tea. Next. Now, pu-erh is a dark tea. A dark tea means it's a post-fermentation tea or post-fermented tea. And for pu-erh, you can either ferment it naturally or you can ferment it manually. And this is a photo of a fermentation facility. And in the old days, it's really difficult to get in one of these facilities because it is considered an industry secret. So, but because my tea master is really well connected, so he took us into a facility. So the fermentation of the tea leaves is different from the fermentation of black tea. This is a true fermentation involving microbes. So it is the same kind of food, the finished tea is kind of the same kind of food as, say, cheese and kimchi or sauerkraut, those truly fermented food groups. And what they do is the finished tea will stack up to a pile of a certain height, and then certain amount of moisture, actually water, is sprayed onto the leaves to add to to moisten the leaves. And then the pile is covered by a tarp or a blanket and some kind of material. And then the tea, there will be heat generated, which is kind of like a biological reaction involving heat and moisture. So the tea master will have to test the temperature of the pile and then to flip or to turn the pile every so many days. And then usually it takes about 4 to 5 turning before the fermentation is complete. So when it is complete, then the entire pile will have to be removed from this facility to a dry facility, which is another room, to dry it out for another month or so. So this whole process takes about 4 to 6 weeks, and not all pu-erh teas undergo this process, and I will talk about it a little bit later. Next. This is a photo of my friend Abu. Now, Abu is the daughter of an Aka tea farming family in Nannuo Mountain. And if you have read the book, you'll be very familiar with Nannuo Mountain. And Lisa spoke at length to Abu and was quite inspired by her life experiences. And a lot of the events that happened to the main character in the book actually was inspired by Abu's life stories. Next. So in 2017, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane was released. And this photo was taken at the book signing at Vroman's bookstore in Pasadena, California. Next. So what is pu-erh tea, and how is this tea different from other teas, and why is this tea became such a popular tea, especially in Asia? So pu-erh tea is only produced in Yunnan. There's no pu-erh tea produced in any other places in the world or any other places in China. And Yunnan, as I mentioned earlier, it is the first place where tea was first cultivated, long time ago. So before the tea was spread or tea planting was spread to other places, pu-erh was the only place that tea was available. So even back in long time ago, pu-erh was more of a export tea, So as early as 7th century, during the Tang Dynasty, pu-erh was used to trade war horses with Tibet. So Yunnan China will trade, will give Tibet tea, and then in return, Tibet will give China these really strong war horses. So later in the 7th century, pu-erh was chosen as one of the tribute tea. So the teas from Yunnan, pu-erh teas, were transported to Beijing to give to the imperial court. And then it was also a very popular tea enjoyed by the southern Chinese, as well as overseas Chinese in Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. So before the invention of airplane, trains, and ships, pu-erh tea was transported primarily by mules, horses, or porters. Now, legend has it that it was because of this long journey of transportation that allowed for the tea leaves to ferment along the way and became very mellow and smooth when the tea reached its destination. And these tea trades, these trade routes are now known as the famous ancient tea horse routes. Next.
We do have a quick question on the 7th century, and people are interested in knowing if we're talking about 7th century BC or BCE.
It's AD. It's 7th century
BCE.
AD. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's during that time is the Tang Dynasty, which is like the golden era in Chinese history. So, as I mentioned earlier too, that pu-erh tea is a tea enjoyed and revered by the Chinese in southern China and Hong Kong, where I grew up. And there, pu-erh tea is a must-have tea to pair it with dim sum. And this is a picture that I took when I had dim sum in Hong Kong during one of my trips. And I was told, growing up that you need pu-erh tea because it will help you digest the greasy food from the restaurants or from the dim sum. And so I go, okay, but then now I understand why pu-erh was specifically selected to pair with dim sum or Chinese food. It is because of the microbes that emerge during the fermentation, and it increases our gut diversity and actually helps digestion, all around. So if you happen to have a meal that makes you feel really full, very bloated, try a cup of pu-erh tea, and it really works. Next. So I'm going to talk about these ancient tea trees. So when you talk about how does pu-erh tea different from other teas, and I'm going to tell you 3 aspects that pu-erh is different from other teas. So the first aspect is the raw materials. Now, although the majority of pu-erh teas are made from these small monoculture bushes, remember the slide of the modern tea plantations? But some pu-erh are still made from these old tea trees that were planted centuries ago. Now, because these tea trees were, I said it before, were planted by seeds, they are very genetically diverse. And thus it offers more complex and nuanced flavors. It just offers a lot better mouthfeel, more. Sometimes, you would have a tea, then you think that, God, tea is just dancing in my mouth. Is that kind of feeling. In addition, the forest environment in which these tea trees are grown is considered by researchers as the most ideal environment for tea planting. So why? It is because the ecosystem provides everything the tea trees need. So when I talked about the multi-layered vegetative structure, this environment, for example, like the one on the bottom, you see a lot of these really tall forest trees. They serve as a tree canopy to provide some sunshades for the tea trees, which is in the middle layer. And then the bottom layers are, fallen leaves, the herbs, and they're they're mulches that fertilizes the tea trees. So also the root system of these tea trees are very deep, and they intertwine with other forest plants, making the tea trees more resilient to environmental stressors. So therefore, no chemicals are needed to help these trees thrive. So pu-erh teas made from this type of raw material is the most sought after and most valued. Next. The second difference that pu-erh tea has from other teas is its packaging. So if you've ever been to Yunnan province, almost every tea shop that you go into, you would see an array of different tea cakes displayed on the shelf, just like the one on the top left-hand corner. Unlike most teas that are sold as loose leaf, most pu-erhs are compressed into round cakes or other shapes like bricks or little dome shaped. And I would show you what a tea cake looks like in a minute. And then 7 cakes are packaged in a tong. A tong means a stack, and they are wrapped in bamboo shoot leaves. Yunnan has a lot of bamboo, so there are plenty of these kind of organic raw materials. And the largest compressed pu-erh tea is a pu-erh tea screen that I saw at the Yunnan Agriculture University pu-erh Institute, and that picture is on the right top hand corner. So inside the screen, the black part, that is a pu-erh tea, a very big pu-erh tea with some ornate imprints in it. And so in the old days, the compressed tea, the reason to compress the tea was for easy transport. But today, of course, is not for transportation purpose, but is for easy storage. So, you know, just the appearance of pu-erh tea can be very, very intriguing and attractive. Next. So the third difference that this tea sets itself apart from other teas is that it is a tea that can be aged for as long as you want, just like fine wine. So this is a photo that shows from year 1, when the tea was first produced. It is kind of a light yellow color, all the way to year 30th, and it became really dark, kind of a dark amber color. Next. And this is a display of tea cakes made during the 40s to mid 70s. Many people call these tea cakes the drinkable antique or vintage tea cakes. And these tea cakes are worth tens of thousands of dollars right now. And they can only be available to purchase in auction houses. If you can find someone who can sell you this kind of tea cake for several $100s, don't buy it because they're very likely to be faked. Next. So there are two major types of pu-erh teas. One is called the raw pu-erh teas. The other is called ripe pu-erh teas. They look very different, as you can tell from the picture. The tea broth, the color of the tea broth are different. The tea leaves are a little different, and also the color of the cakes are very different. They are actually made from the same finished tea, except the ripe pu-erh has undergone a fermentation process. And you can refer back to the earlier slide that you see about the fermentation. The raw pu-erh does not go through the process and only ages naturally. Actually, ripe pu-erh is a rather recent creation. And when I was living in Hong Kong, you know, growing up in the 60s, there was only one type of pu-erh, and that was the aged raw pu-erh. Now, tea drinkers in Hong Kong and also in Guangzhou have an affinity towards some teas that are more processed. So they like, for example, roasted oolong, black tea, and aged pu-erh. They rarely drink green tea. And these may have to do with the weather in Hong Kong or in southern China, because it was really hot and humid there during the spring and also during the summer. And the humidity sometimes can cause discomfort in our body. And because of the humidity in Hong Kong, tea merchants discovered early on that if they store the newly purchased pu-erh tea in dark basements along the harbor, the tea became smooth, non-bitter, and soothing to the stomach. That's what they believe, in a few years. So all the pu-erh teas are usually stored, or they call it warehoused, before they actually sold to customers. And this was how the culture of aged pu-erh tea developed. Now, in the 70s, the demand for aged pu-erh increased due to the city's economic growth. And tea merchants could not keep up with the demand. As you remember, this tea needs to be stored several years, up to 10 years before it goes to the customer. So tea manufacturers in Yunnan started experimenting with a quick fermentation process, which is called udui. And the newly finished pu-erh can, using the process that you saw in that facility, can turn into a pu-erh similar to the one that's been aged naturally for 30 years, just in a few months. So it really shortened the aging time. That said, naturally aged raw pu-erh is still considered to be the pinnacle of all pu-erh teas. So in some ways, it does not replace it, but then it makes it a lot quicker that you can enjoy the flavor and the smoothness of the pu-erh tea in very quick time. And so the right pu-erh becomes kind of a very popular, probably the most popular type of pu-erh today. Next. Okay. Now, pu-erh tea is probably one of the most popular teas in Asia, in China, and is making its way to the US too. Now, false labeling and counterfeits are rampant. Some people want to make a quick buck with, create a fake pu-erh. Now, this tea cake that you're looking at, the one to the left, that is a tea cake called Truly Simple Elegant, made in 1996 and collected by my tea master. And actually, Lisa C's book mentioned this tea cake. To prevent counterfeiting, Master Chan hand wrote the wrapper for each cake, so that he figured, this cannot be reprint. However, recently he wrote to me and he said he found a tea cake actually using pretty much the exact handwriting wrapper that he has, except there's a little, addition of a stamp. So he was dumbfounded. He said, "Have you seen this, Linda?" And I said, "No." And actually, false labeling and counterfeiting happens in every tea region. For example, like Darjeeling, there are more Darjeeling sold than the teas produced in Darjeeling. So to avoid getting cheated, you need to be an informed consumer and find a trusted vendor to be sort of your gatekeeper, so you don't have to spend money to buy teas that are lower quality. So this concludes my PowerPoint presentation, and I would like to do some show and tell and also a demonstration of how to break apart a tea cake and how to best brew pu-erh tea using the Gongfu tea brewing method.
Thank you so much, Linda, for this presentation. Before we move on to your demonstration, I'm getting multiple people asking if you could clarify which one's the real one and which one's the fake one on the screen right now.
Thank you. The one on the left is the real one.
So the one on in the left. The one with the wrapper, the one without the plastic.
No, the one on the left. Okay, the one on the right has like a blue stamp. That one is a fake. That's a fake.
This is the fake.
Yeah, the one on the right, on the left, without that blue stamp, is real.
Perfect.
Sorry, I didn't clarify.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I can't see myself.
The view is perfect.
Okay.
We could see the entire tea set and we could see you.
Perfect. So what I'm gonna do is to show you what a tea cake look like. Okay, I can't see myself, so I hope that the angle is correct. So this is a tea cake. This one is a large tea cake. It's probably the most, it's the most common traditional size. It has 357 grams, and which equivalent to about 14 ounces. It's pretty heavy. And then in the back, this is how it looks like. It has little indentation, and that is from the pressing process. And then usually in the back, you can see a lot of information. You can really see it clearly here, but it should have the production date and the area and the instruction of how do you keep the pu-erh over time. So this is a large one. This one is from 2007. Okay, and then there are other sizes. For example, this is a 100 grams. This is not a very popular size in China because most people buy the large ones. But then, in the United States, because pu-erh is still not very popular, so that I always request the manufacturers to give me this small size. So then you can have bricks. So this is a 100-gram cake. 100 gram is equivalent to about 3.5 ounces. So it can be a brick, and this is a larger brick wrapped in bamboo shoot leaves. And this is a tong. Now this is a stack of this small size. So if you have the large cakes, and usually there are 7 cakes in a stack, and it could be very heavy. And so this material, I find this is like brilliantly packaged because it's permeable, so it allows oxygens to go in. It's organic, and then also, you know, it's bamboo is natural material. Sometimes the bamboo flavors can kind of impart into the tea. It's great for storing, you know, aging pu-erh. So then you have these called Torcha, which is dome shape. And because today a lot of people are into convenience, so that they make these, you know, individually wrapped 5-gram torcha. So it's really easy. You dunk one in a cup, pour hot water, and drain. And now that people are also making these sort of, it looks like a candy. It's called dragon pearls, and it comes in like 5 grams each or 8 grams each. And you know, so it's also very easily consumed. So a lot of people, you know, either after they buy the pu-erh cake, and they say, well, how do you open the pu-erh cake? So this is what you do. So this is a small cake, and I usually use a tray, but you actually don't have to. You can use any plate or a chopping board. So you unwrap the cake. This is how a cake look like. And then I use a pick. This is called a pu-erh cake, a pick. And you can purchase, you know, from some, most of the pu-erh vendors would carry that. If not, you can use anything sharp. A ice pick or a letter opener will do. So the most important thing when you pry open the pu-erh cake is safety, because this can be very sharp, and you definitely don't want to point to where your hands is. So that you want to do it away from your hand, and then you just find a spot to hook into the cake on the side, okay? And then you just sort of wiggle it around. So you can see the leaves are falling out of the brick. And you don't have to do it to all the, you know, for the entire cake. It's up to you. Some people like to, you know, break up the entire cake, put it in a caddy, and then, you know, use it as they need. But then I usually like to just kind of take out the amount of leaves that I need, and then I put it back. And I put a rubber band around it, or I put it, you know, in a paper bag, and then I just kind of store it away. So this is about how much I would need for this Gaiwan. So pu-erh is made from the large leaf variety, and it has a lot of flavors. So we recommend that pu-erh be steeped in a Gongfu style manner. Now, Gongfu tea is very popular in Asia, in China. If you ever been to a tea shop in China, you know, they would invite you to come in, and then they would, you know, start brewing the tea. They have a tea table, very fancy, and then you can taste the tea to the ones that you like, and then you can buy it. So, and essentially, the difference between the Gongfu tea brewing and the Western type of tea brewing is that we use very small amount of water, and we brew it multiple times with very short steeping time. So before I go, I do this. This is called a Gaiwan, which means lidded bowl, a bowl with a lid. And this has been around for centuries and is probably one of the most, I would say, functional, easy tea brewing vessels. So before I brew, I would like to warm up all my utensils. This is called a fairness cup. And the role of this cup is to basically collect multiple steepings so that the tea would be even. So now all my tea vessels are warmed. And I'm going to put the tea leaves in here. And for this size, and there are different sizes of Gaiwan. For this size, I use about 3 grams of tea leaves. So this is what it looks like. And before we steep, we usually give the leaves a quick rinse. So how do you rinse the tea leaves? You just pour the hot water and you pour it out. You do not drink this. And the reason for rinsing the tea leaves are twofold. One is that, because pu-erh is sun-dried, and then, especially sometimes are kept for a decade or so. So rinsing it actually is provides some, you're getting rid of some of the particles or some of the dust that has been collected over the years. And more importantly, actually, is to allow the leaves to open up, because pu-erh is compressed. So all the tea leaves are very tightly compressed. So when you rinse it, the tea leaves have already been expanded. And so the flavors are very easily released. So this is the first steeping. And I would kind of stir it a little bit. And all it takes is about 5 to 10 seconds. I brew my teas very quickly, so the tea is done. And then you drain it into the fairness cup. And sometimes, maybe I use a bigger cup, or I have a company. So I would like to do maybe 2 steepings so that I could have several cups of tea. So the second steeping, I would like to brew it just a tad longer. Here maybe 12 seconds. So it doesn't have to be really all that exact. And we always try to avoid overbrewing because it can get really bitter. But then if you brew it right, it is really sweet and it's really pleasant. So as you can tell, it is very clear. It's very delicious. Cheers. This is a very good cup of tea. So you can experiment at home, and we still have some time. And Jose, I think I can answer some questions if you have some.
Thanks again. Every time you do that, I'm just in awe of watching that tea ceremony. It's so enjoyable to watch. I love it so much. Thank you once again for doing that.
You're welcome.
But multiple people asked this while you're doing the demo. The water temperature, is there a specific temperature that you're looking for? Could it be too hot, too cold? Is there a range for the temperature?
Great question. So water temperature and the quality of water are very important. So I always use mineral water. That would be my first choice. And if you come to, I have at least like 10 gallons at any given time at my house because that's what I use. But if you don't have mountain spring water, you can use filtered water. But sometimes you don't want something that is too filtered because then it makes the tea very flat. And you don't want to use tap water because there are a lot of, chlorine and chemicals. And sometimes, I have experiment using different types of water, and the outcomes are very different. So this is very interesting. You can do your own experimentation and to see, what type of water do you would like. So water temperature for green tea or for the newly made pu-erh tea, I use like 195 degrees Fahrenheit. So not too hot. But then for anything over 5 years, 10 years, then you can use, up to like 210, close to boiling. For ripe pu-erh, you definitely want to use boiling water, 212. So you can basically use boiling water for most pu-erh, except for the pu-erh below 5 years.
Now, once you open this big cake, obviously you're buying, cakes that are 300
Yeah.
grams, 100 grams. How do you store the leftover, and how long can you store it?
Okay, you can store pu-erh for as long as you want. I think the oldest pu-erh is at the Palace Museum in Beijing, and I was told it's like more than 100 years old. Now, of course, I think if you have something that old, it's still drinkable, but then it probably is not at its peak. Usually, the people in the industry say about 25 years is actually at its peak. So this is what I do. I just kind of wrap it back into, like, for a small cake, you actually don't, I usually don't take too long to finish a cake, but then I usually have like multiple cakes that I open, and then I just put a rubber band around it, or I put a paper bag around it, and then you want to just kind of store it in a place where it's not that are pretty open, but then not in a place where you have a lot of ambient odor. And that's the most important thing. Pu-erh teas can absorb, or any kind of tea can absorb odors very easily. So kitchen pantry is not a good place to store pu-erh, because you have herbs, you have other things. So you want to put it like maybe on a bookshelf, or you have a basket in your den or in your bedroom. Just store it there, just so long as there's no direct sunlight, as well as there's no particular odor. And you can just put a rubber band around it and, just store it. It's actually very easy. If you're a serious collector, of course, then you want to collect a tone, and then you can put it in, a specific, maybe a closet or something like that. If you talk about like storage, if you're, there just like wine, and there are different methods of storage, but if you're just a casual drinker and you just want to drink and not to collect, so just put it in a clean place would be the most important.
Awesome, thank you. So talking about the storage of it, when it's being stored in the big warehouses, you talk a lot about the humidity, and obviously when they first started doing this, there was no temperature control, no humidity control. Is that something that's taken into account now to ensure the quality of the tea? Is there humidity controls?
Right. I think, as I said earlier, if I know a lot of collectors, or people who are really serious in collecting pu-erh, they would do a humidity control. But how much humidity, and then sometimes it also has to do with the location where the tea cakes are being stored. For example, I think the weather in Los Angeles is pretty dry. If you live in Florida, it's probably closer to Hong Kong. So it's very different. It's kind of up to you. And some people don't want humidity. I mean, nowadays, see, in the old days, the production of pu-erh is very different from the production of pu-erh today. In the old days, the newly made pu-erh is pretty coarse. It's not as precise or as meticulous as the production today. So that the newly made pu-erh is very, very bitter, very coarse. So people like to kind of, let the edges, smooth out before you drink it. But today, actually, this one is 2019, is actually very delicious. And because of the production is different. So some people actually don't want too much humidity so that it changes. Because as the tea changes and kind of ferments naturally, it kind of loses out some of the aroma and fragrances, but then it turns into other types of taste. So it depends on the tea and it depends on the personal preference.
Perfect, thank you. In talking about the process of making, we talked about fermentation. A lot of times when I think of fermentation, I think of adding like yeast or bacteria. Is anything added to the tea during this fermentation process?
Yes. Nothing is added except moisture. They add water. They actually moisten the pile to about 30 to 40%. So nothing is added to the tea leaves. So it's something that it just naturally emerges. The good bacteria just naturally, emerge into the pile. And every pile could be different because the time and some fermentations a little heavier than others. So it really depends.
And speaking of bacteria and the bacteria in the tea, there's a few questions popping up about, doesn't the hot water kill the good bacteria that is beneficial for one?
Yes. In fact, I attended a conference, a seminar by a tea scientist, and yes, that could be right. It will kill the bacteria. So, the fermentation and the bacteria existing, and it has been kind of a topic for a lot of researchers. And I'm not a researcher, so I can't really answer very precisely what kind of bacteria are they live, not live, things like that. But so yeah, the tea scientists, said in the seminar that you can dial it back a little bit if you want, so that it may not. So, but at what temperature the microbes would die down, I don't know.
So
Good question.
These are some really great questions that are coming in. So I think we have a room for a couple more questions.
Sure.
And I found this one very interesting. Speaking about the farmers in China, does this create generational wealth for the families? Is there generations that are taking this on as urbanization is happening in China? Are we losing some of these farmers? Are we losing some of these traditions? Yeah. Or are they still able to sustain themselves farming the tea?
Very good. What happened is that, in Yunnan, and this is something that although I do complain whenever I see the price raise, I go, it's getting more expensive. But the pu-erh tea in this region has really lifted the farmer from poverty. So even as early as 2003, I have talked to farmers, they said as early as 2003, many of them had never seen a $50 yuan bill. Not $50 US, $50 renminbi, bill. But today, they, the farmers are becoming very wealthy, and so they build houses, and I think one of the part that I wish they could do better is to kind of preserve like their village and their regional culture. But then, they can say, hey, we want modern convenience too. We want a working toilet. When I went to Yunnan in 2008, I stayed with a tea farmer. At night when I have to go to the bathroom, I got to go to the outhouse, and all the dogs bark, so I can definitely understand. But then the village now, they have roads. When I first went there, they have no paved roads. It's kind of like, the driver is saying, okay, eat when you can, because you never know if there's an accident, in the mountain, you can stuck there for a long time, so, but their livelihood definitely have become more. So a lot of the younger generation, they went out to the city to have education. They returned to help their parents because it is actually it has the economic value of what they do.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to know that it is lifting up the generation, and there is some amount of generational wealth being produced. So that's great to hear. So last question. because we are at 1 o'clock. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. But the question that always comes in: where can we get good tea?
Okay, now you can go online. I think the best. I'm not saying that only online has good teas. You can go to your local tea stores, but you want to make sure that the owner knows what he or she is sourcing from. So, like if you're online, check. If you're on a site, check the reviews, and talk to your friends. And if you find a site that has a lot of good reviews, buy some small, at the smallest amount that you can possibly buy. You don't want to invest like several $100s, not knowing what you're buying. Buy the samplers or buy samples. So at least you can try, hey, the tea quality is pretty good. And then you can, buy several, getting bigger and bigger purchases. So it's kind of like, go to restaurants, you don't know, you go to Yelp and then you try to find the reviews and say, hey, this is the good one. It's kind of like the same kind of, purchasing decision. But another thing is just to, read more about it and to be an informed consumer.
I want to thank you. The hour I spend with you is always the fastest hour of my day. I look
Thank
down at the
you.
clock and it's like I need to end this presentation. I do need to respect everybody's time. So I do want to thank everybody for giving us an hour of your time on a Saturday. I know it's a beautiful day out and you could be doing so many amazing things. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Have
Don't
some
forget to
tea.
join. Yes, definitely have some tea. Don't forget to follow us on all the socials at LA County Library. And Ms. Linda, I will leave the last word to you.
Thank you. And thank you for, spending the hour with me. And I hope that with this presentation, you get to know about this tea. And if you have not read The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, check it out from your local library.